October 16, 1962. Washington, D.C., the morning light filtered through the blinds of a cramped office in Langley, Virginia, where Michael Reed sat hunched over a stack of reconnaissance photographs. His hands trembled slightly as he held the images, grainy black and white shots of Soviet missile installations in Cuba, each one a potential death sentence for millions of Americans. But it wasn't the missiles that made his heart race. It was the realization that had been gnawing at him for the past 72 hours. The woman he loved, the woman whose laughter had become the only light in his shadowy world, might be the very person who had helped put those missiles there. Michael Reed was 34 years old, a decorated CIA officer who had spent the better part of a decade in the shadows of the Cold War. He had run operations in Berlin, Vienna, and Prague. He had seen men broken by torture, watched friendships dissolve under the weight of ideology, and learned to trust no one. But then came Elena Vargas. She arrived at Langley 6 months earlier as part of a special translation unit, Cuban expatriates who could parse the intercepted communications between Havana and Moscow. Elena was different from the other translators. She was brilliant, yes, with a gift for languages that bordered on supernatural, but it was her warmth that disarmed him. In a building where everyone wore masks, she seemed genuine. Her dark eyes held depths of sadness that spoke of loss, of a homeland left behind, of sacrifices made in the name of freedom. Their first conversation happened in the cafeteria on a rainy Tuesday in May. Michael had been reviewing transcripts when Elena approached, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You look like you could use this more than I can," she said, her accent wrapping around the English words like silk. He looked up, surprised. In his line of work, kindness was often a weapon. But her smile was disarming, and he found himself accepting the coffee, then accepting her company, and eventually, against every instinct and regulation, accepting her into his heart. By August they were meeting in secret, not because of agency rules, though those existed, but because Michael had learned long ago that in espionage, love was a liability. Love made you vulnerable. Love made you weak. And yet he couldn't stop himself. They would meet at a small apartment in Georgetown that Michael kept under an assumed name. There, away from the listening devices and suspicious colleagues, they could be themselves. Elena would cook arroz con pollo while telling him stories of her childhood in Havana, running through streets that smelled of cigars and sea salt, dancing to music that pulsed with life. She had fled Cuba in 1959, she told him, after Castro's revolution turned her family's sugar plantation into state property. Her father had been imprisoned. Her mother had died of heartbreak. Elena escaped with nothing but the clothes on her back and a fierce determination to fight the regime that had destroyed her world. Michael believed every word. How could he not? When she spoke of her pain, tears glistened in her eyes. When she made love to him, it felt like an act of defiance against the darkness that surrounded them both. But on October 14th, everything changed. A U-2 spy plane captured photographs of Soviet SS-4 medium-range ballistic missiles being installed in Cuba. President Kennedy convened the Executive Committee of the National Security Council. The world teetered on the brink of nuclear war. And Michael Reed, working 18-hour days in the CIA's Cuba task force, began to notice inconsistencies. Small things at first. Elena had translated a communication from a Soviet officer in Havana, but her version differed subtly from what another translator had produced. When Michael checked the original Russian, he found Elena's translation had omitted a crucial detail about missile deployment timelines. It could have been an honest mistake. Translations were imperfect, especially under pressure. But Michael's instincts, honed by years of paranoia and survival, began to whisper warnings he didn't want to hear. He started watching her. Not officially. He couldn't bring himself to file a report, not yet, but carefully, painfully. He noticed she stayed late at the office, often alone in the translation room. He saw her making phone calls from a pay phone outside the building, even though she had a phone at her desk. And then, on October 18th, he followed her. It was raining again, a cold autumn rain that turned the streets of Washington into rivers of gray. Elena left Langley at 8 p.m., took a bus to DuPont Circle, then walked 6 blocks to a brownstone apartment building. Michael watched from across the street as she entered. 20 minutes later, a man emerged. Michael recognized him immediately, Dmitry Volkov, a Soviet diplomat attached to their embassy, known to the CIA as a KGB officer operating under diplomatic cover. The world seemed to stop. Michael stood in the rain, water streaming down his face, feeling his heart shatter into pieces too small to ever reassemble. Every moment they had shared suddenly became suspect. Every kiss, every whispered confession, every night she had lain in his arms, had it all been a lie? Or worse, had it been real for him but merely an assignment for her? He didn't confront her that night. He couldn't. Instead, he went to his Georgetown apartment, poured himself 3 fingers of bourbon, and sat in the dark trying to understand how he had been so blind. The CIA trained its officers to spot deception, to read micro-expressions, to trust nothing. And yet he had trusted her completely. He had given her access to his heart, and in doing so, he had potentially given her access to secrets that could cost American lives. The next morning, October 19th, Michael requested a private meeting with James Donovan, his supervisor in the counterintelligence division. Donovan was a hard man, weathered by decades of Cold War duplicity. He listened without expression as Michael laid out his suspicions, the translation discrepancies, the late nights, the meeting with Volkov. When Michael finished, Donovan lit a cigarette and studied him with eyes that had seen too many good men destroyed by this work. "How long have you been involved with her?" he asked. Michael felt his face flush. 6 months, he admitted. Donovan nodded slowly. "And you're only reporting this now because you followed her to a meeting with a known KGB officer. It wasn't a question." Michael nodded, shame burning in his chest. Donovan leaned back in his chair. "Here's what's going to happen. We're going to put her under full surveillance. We're going to monitor every communication, every movement. And you're going to continue your relationship with her as if nothing has changed. Because if she is a double agent, we need to know what she's passing to the Soviets and what they're telling her in return." The order felt like a death sentence. Michael was to become a double agent himself, pretending love to extract information from the woman he genuinely loved. For the next 5 days, as the Cuban Missile Crisis escalated and the world held its breath, Michael played his role. He met Elena at their apartment. He held her. He listened as she expressed fear about the crisis, worry that nuclear war would erase everything. And all the while, he studied her for signs of deception. Was the fear in her voice genuine, or was she performing? When she touched his face and told him she loved him, did she mean it, or was she simply maintaining her cover? The uncertainty was torture. The CIA's surveillance team reported that Elena met with Volkov twice more during that week. They photographed her passing documents, likely copies of translations, and internal CIA assessments about Soviet intentions. The evidence was overwhelming. Elena Vargas was a KGB agent, likely planted in the translation unit specifically to gather intelligence during the crisis. On October 24th, President Kennedy announced a naval blockade of Cuba. Soviet ships carrying additional missiles were steaming toward the quarantine line. The world had never been closer to nuclear annihilation. And that evening, Michael received orders from Donovan. "Bring her in tomorrow night. We have enough evidence. We're going to arrest her and you're going to be there when we do." Michael felt sick. He knew it had to happen, knew that Alina's betrayal could not go unanswered. But the thought of seeing her arrested, of watching her realize that he had known and had used her just as she had used him, it was almost unbearable. He asked Donovan for one thing. "Let me talk to her first. Alone. Before you bring in the arrest team, I need to understand why." Donovan considered this, then nodded. "You have 1 hour. After that we come in. And Reed, don't let your feelings compromise this operation. She's a professional. She'll lie to you until the very end." October 25th, 1962. Michael called Alina and asked her to meet him at the Georgetown apartment at 8 p.m. She agreed without hesitation, her voice warm and loving. He spent the day preparing himself, rehearsing what he would say, trying to build walls around his heart that might protect him from what was coming. But when she arrived, all his preparation crumbled. She wore a simple blue dress that he loved, her dark hair falling loose around her shoulders. She smiled when she saw him, and for a moment he almost believed that everything could be different, that somehow this was all a terrible misunderstanding. They sat on the couch and Michael poured them both wine. His hands were steady now. He had moved beyond fear into a strange calm, the acceptance that comes when you know pain is inevitable. "Alina," he began, his voice quiet, "I need you to tell me the truth about something." She looked at him, her expression open, trusting. "Of course. What is it?" He took a breath. "Are you working for the KGB?" The question hung in the air between them like smoke. For a long moment, Alina didn't move. Then slowly her expression changed. The warmth drained from her eyes, replaced by something harder, more calculating. But beneath that, Michael saw something else, sadness, regret, perhaps even genuine pain. "How long have you known?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "A week," he said. "I followed you to your meeting with Volkov." She nodded slowly, setting down her wine glass. "I suppose it doesn't matter now." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the dark street below. "You want to know why? That's why you brought me here, isn't it? To understand why I betrayed you." Michael felt his throat tighten. "Yes." Alina turned to face him, and in the dim light of the apartment she looked younger, more vulnerable. "Everything I told you about my family was true. My father was imprisoned by Castro. My mother did die. But I didn't escape Cuba, Michael. I was recruited by the KGB in 1960. They found me in Miami, desperate and alone, and they offered me a way to fight back. Not against Castro, against the Americans who had supported Batista's dictatorship for decades, who had turned my country into their playground while my people starved. They trained me in Moscow. They gave me a new identity, a cover story, and a mission: infiltrate the CIA's translation unit, gather intelligence, and when the time came, help the Soviet Union protect Cuba from American aggression." Her voice was steady, but Michael could hear the emotion beneath it. "I didn't expect to meet you. I didn't expect to feel anything for you, but I did. God help me, I did." Michael stood, his fists clenched at his sides. "So what was I? An assignment? A convenient source of information?" Alina's eyes flashed. "At first, yes, but it became more than that. You have to believe me, Michael. What we had was real. I fell in love with you, and I hated myself for it because I knew it would end like this. I knew that eventually you would discover the truth and I would lose you. but I couldn't stop. I couldn't walk away from you, even though I knew I should." Michael felt tears burning in his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. "You've been passing secrets to the Soviets during the most dangerous crisis in human history. Do you understand what that means? Those missiles in Cuba could kill millions of people. And you've been helping the people who put them there." Alina's voice rose, passionate and fierce. "Those missiles are there because your government tried to invade Cuba at the Bay of Pigs. They're there because the United States has had nuclear weapons pointed at the Soviet Union for years. Cuba has the right to defend itself, just as America does. I'm not a traitor, Michael. I'm a soldier fighting for what I believe in, just like you." Michael shook his head. "You're a spy who seduced an intelligence officer to steal secrets. Don't try to make it noble." The words came out harsher than he intended, and he saw them land like blows. Alina's face crumpled for a moment, then hardened again. "You're right. I did seduce you, but somewhere along the way it stopped being an act. I love you, Michael. I know you don't believe me, but it's true. And if I could go back and change things, I don't know that I would. Because even though this ends in pain, even though you'll hate me for the rest of your life, I got to love you. And that was worth it." Michael looked at his watch. 45 minutes had passed. In 15 minutes, Donovan's team would arrive to arrest her. He had to make a decision that would define the rest of his life. He could let her go. He could tell her to run, to disappear before the arrest team arrived. He knew the protocols, knew the escape routes. He could give her that chance. But if he did, he would be betraying his country, betraying every principle he had sworn to uphold. And more than that, he would be letting her continue to work for the KGB, potentially passing more secrets that could cost American lives. Or he could do his duty. He could keep her here, let the arrest happen, and watch as the woman he loved was taken away to face interrogation, imprisonment, possibly even execution for espionage. "Alina," he said, his voice breaking, "I love you. God help me, I still love you, but I can't let you go. I can't betray my country, not even for you." She nodded, tears streaming down her face now. "I know, I wouldn't expect you to. You're a good man, Michael. That's why I fell in love with you. You have principles. You have honor. I wish I could say the same about myself." She walked to him, and he didn't stop her as she reached up to touch his face one last time. "In another life," she whispered, "we could have been happy." He pulled her close, holding her as they both wept, two people caught in the machinery of history, ground down by forces larger than themselves. They stood like that until they heard the sound of cars pulling up outside, doors opening, footsteps on the stairs. When Donovan and the arrest team entered the apartment, they found Michael and Alina sitting on opposite ends of the couch, the distance between them speaking volumes. Alina didn't resist. She stood calmly, allowed herself to be handcuffed, and walked out without looking back. Michael watched her go, feeling as though his heart had been ripped from his chest. Donovan stayed behind, lighting another cigarette. "You did the right thing," he said. Michael didn't respond. He wasn't sure he would ever be certain of that. In the days that followed, the Cuban Missile Crisis reached its climax. On October 27th, the world came within minutes of nuclear war. But then, on October 28th, Khrushchev agreed to remove the missiles from Cuba in exchange for an American promise not to invade the island and a secret agreement to remove U.S. missiles from Turkey. The crisis ended. Humanity survived. But for Michael Reed, the war continued. Alina Vargas was interrogated for weeks. She provided some information, enough to appear cooperative, but refused to give up her Soviet handlers or other agents in the network. Eventually, she was tried in a closed military court and sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. Michael attended the sentencing. Their eyes met across the courtroom, and in that moment, he saw everything they had been and everything they would never be. She was led away in chains, and he never saw her again. He requested a transfer out of counterintelligence and spent the rest of his career in analysis, never again allowing himself to get close to anyone in the field. He never married. He never loved again, because how could he? How could he trust his own judgment after being so thoroughly deceived? Or worse, how could he open his heart again knowing that love, real love, could be used as a weapon? Years later, after the Cold War ended and the Soviet Union collapsed, Michael learned through declassified KGB files that Alina had been telling the truth about one thing. Her reports to Moscow had consistently included personal notes expressing genuine affection for him, notes that served no operational purpose and actually complicated her mission. The KGB had reprimanded her multiple times for allowing emotional attachment to compromise her objectivity. She had loved him. It hadn't been entirely an act, and somehow that made it worse. Because it meant they had both been casualties of a war that demanded they sacrifice their humanity for ideology. They had both loved, and both betrayed, and both lost everything that mattered. The Cuban Missile Crisis became a defining moment of the 20th century, a stark reminder of how close humanity came to self-destruction. But for every public drama, Kennedy and Khrushchev facing off, the naval blockade, the secret negotiations, there were countless private tragedies. People like Michael Reed and Alina Vargas, caught between love and duty, forced to make impossible choices in impossible circumstances. Their story was never declassified, never made public. It remained buried in classified files, one of thousands of footnotes to history, but it was real. The pain was real, the love was real, and the cost was real. In the end, Michael Reed lived another 40 years, dying in 2002 at the age of 74. In his final days, suffering from cancer, he told a visiting priest about Alina. "I still don't know if I did the right thing," he whispered. "I saved my country, but I destroyed my soul." The priest offered comfort, but Michael wasn't sure he deserved it. Because in the arithmetic of espionage, there are no clean victories. Every choice carries a cost. Every loyalty demands a betrayal. And sometimes the price of duty is the death of everything that makes us human. Alina Vargas was released from prison in 1979 after serving 17 years. She returned to Cuba, where she lived quietly until her death in 1998. According to those who knew her in those final years, she never spoke about her time in America, never mentioned the man she had loved and betrayed. But she kept a photograph hidden in her Bible, a picture of a young couple in Georgetown, smiling at the camera, unaware that their happiness was built on lies and would crumble into dust. Two people who loved each other across an impossible divide, destroyed by the very thing that brought them together. That's the real story of the Cold War, not the missiles and the summits, but the human hearts broken in service of ideologies that cared nothing for individual suffering. And as we look back on those 13 days in October 1962 when the world nearly ended, we should remember that for some people it did end. Their world, their love, their hope for happiness, all of it burned away in the fire of history. Michael Reed and Alina Vargas were just two among millions, but their story deserves to be told, because it reminds us that behind every great historical event are ordinary people making extraordinary sacrifices, often at a cost too terrible to measure.